This video is going to cover the basics of short-term memory and long-term memory, including how they work as stages of memory processing and feed from one into the other, and how they differ in terms of capacity and how long they can each hold on to information for. One thing to know about short-term memory is that it is also sometimes referred to as working memory. These two things are pretty much the same thing. Original models of memory stages used the term short term memory, but eventually it was recognized that short term memory isn't just a place for holding information, it is also a place for working with it. Working memory is the more recent term. Let's look at a very simple model of different stages memory goes through. Now, I've left out sensory memory, which comes in between incoming information and short-term memory, but I want to focus this video on the stages of short-term and long-term memory. First, incoming information, material to be learned, enters short-term memory. Short-term memory is what we are paying attention to, holding in mind at any one moment. Once we stop thinking about it, it is no longer in short-term memory. Some of the information in short term memory, but not all, is able to get into long term memory. Long term memory is what you could consider permanent memory storage. While short term memory lasts on the order of seconds, half a minute maybe, long term memory lasts potentially for life. An example of short term memory is holding a phone number in mind that someone just told you, and you need to write it down or type it into your phone. An example of long term memory is your childhood phone number, one that you have memorized. And not everything in short term memory makes it into long term memory. Most likely to get stored in long term memory is information that is meaningful, emotionally charged, information that gets repeated practice, especially at being remembered, and information that is actively associated with existing knowledge. In other words, related to what is already known. Our existing knowledge is sticky in that way. It sticks to new information it can relate to and helps us remember it. And it's important to note this isn't the only direction information flows into memory. Information in long term memory gets pulled into short term memory. This happens when we remember or recall something we already know, like that childhood phone number. So, the contents of short term memory can either be from the environment or long term memory. And as I was noting earlier, short term memory is sometimes referred to as working memory because it is not just where we temporarily hold information, it is also where we work with that information. For example, think how you might go about solving the multiplication problem 28 times 6 in your head. You are doing that work within short term or working memory. Okay, let's take a look at an example of what happens when we learn something new. Let's take this creature here, assuming it is unfamiliar to you. When we first take in its features and that information enters short term or working memory, even before becoming long term memory, we pull what we already know from long term memory to make sense of it. For example, we know things with eyes and legs are usually animals, so we can assume it is some sort of animal. It looks similar to a fish or a crustacean, so it may have shared characteristics. The environment looks like small rocks, so it must be small. And there are lots of crazy looking creatures like this one living in the sea, so it must be from the sea. By the way, this creature is not from the sea, like I had originally thought. It is actually a nymph or young version of a land dwelling leafhopper. But you get the idea. Something important to note is that when what we are learning about this creature is transferred to long term memory, the more connections we can make between the new thing and what we already know, the stronger long term memory will be for it. It will be less prone to forgetting because it will be more rooted in memory. I like to think of it as being like a tree with its roots in the ground. The more extensive the root system, the less likely the tree is to topple over and become unearthed. It is a similar situation with the brain. The more deeply interconnected new information is with what is already known, the more likely it will stick around and not be forgotten. Coming back to these two types of memory, while long term memory is limitless, as far as we know, it will never become full. This is not true of working memory, which can become full quite easily. If working memory capacity is exceeded, something is dropped. That wraps up this video. Now, to remember what you have just learned, practice remembering it. Put it back into your working memory. Take a moment to either write down what you can remember or at least close your eyes and try to remember. This will make it more likely to stick around in long term memory.